Evolution is a term to define only one organism, and that's the self. The self is the universe, the self is the alpha and omega, God and infinity. And that's the only thing that evolves, because we are all part of the self. Nothing goes through an evolutionary process alone, or without direct benefit to the whole. So when you begin to think that there's this controlling elite, this controlling hand behind the curtains leading the planet to destruction, when you think the end is near, the apocalypse, Armageddon, and when you think we as a species are doomed, it is not they, it is you that brought this about. And for a very good reason. You are evolving. Stop blaming everybody and everything else. Quit panicking about global tyranny and natural disaster and pay attention. Because the world is telling you something, is telling you exactly what is wrong with you and how to fix it.
So you just watched a first minute of a documentary called Kymatica, created by Ben Stewart, who is my guest on this podcast episode. This documentary has been watched by millions of people, and my guest Ben, he created a bunch of other iconic documentaries. He created Limitless, Esoteric Agenda, Psychedelica, and some really, really cool shows. I'm super excited to have Ben on my show. I hope you're going to enjoy it as much as I did interviewing him. All right, so this is Mike Sigula from TrueTheory.com, and this is True Theory Podcast, Episode 3. And my guest today is Ben Stewart. He's a US-based filmmaker and musician. His documentaries have been watched by millions of people all around the world. He's the creator of Esoteric Agenda, Kymatica and Ungrip. He hosts 3 different shows on Gaia Network called Waking Infinity, Psychedelica, and Limitless. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me.
So, I've been watching your stuff for a very long time. I remember watching Kymatica probably in 2008, more or less. I'm just curious, what made you to make these documentaries? Because, I've been watching hundreds, if not thousands, of documentaries over the years, and Kymatica to me is still like one of my top 10 favorites. It's not only all these ideas and philosophy, but also the way it's created, like the music, back soundtrack, and like just artistic way that is all presented. So it almost seemed to me like you get this divine inspiration to put this work together. And, I'm just curious, like, what was the process like? Because you didn't have a lot of experience with filmmaking before Esoteric Agenda, right?
No, not at all. So yeah, my process going into it was I was in the military. Well, I've always been a musician. And then I was in the military from 2000 to 2006. And when you're in the military, you're not allowed to have an opinion about what's going on in the world. You toe the party line, you represent the military industrial complex. So as soon as I got out of the military, I was still in my band, which was Hyrosonic, and I was a singer-songwriter. So a lot of people were asking me, like, what are your lyrics about? We know that you have some deeper thoughts about what's going on in the world, but what are the lyrics about? And as an artist, I've always kind of felt that just responding with words was too drab. And I just decided, I'm getting so many people asking me what it is I think about what's going on in the world that I'm just going to make a film about it. So I never did a demo reel. My brother and I worked on that together, and Kymatica together. And he helped me learn how to do basically editing software. I was music producing beforehand, so it wasn't too foreign to me. But really, it's not like I was even researching for years and years beforehand. What it really was more or less, I knew that I needed to speak to the world, and I knew that I needed to get something out that was somewhat similar to what Peter Joseph did with Zeitgeist. It needed to be, I didn't make it anonymous, but his first film, he didn't really have his name, so I didn't really put my name in the first film either. I had it on the DVD, but he worked on a good piece of film and had it for free online, so it superseded people's, like, wait a minute, before you watch this documentary, this truth documentary, we need to settle up on something. I was like, that's cool, because that's like speaking without words. That's like saying, I don't want anything from you, I want you to wake up. And I knew that that was the message that I wanted to give, but I didn't see that he was going into the spiritual topics or into the psychology that I wanted to go into. So I just began researching and editing. I just would research something, I would record the vocals, I would put it on in my editing software, which was Final Cut Express at the time, which is a really low version of Final Cut. And I just spent 6 months, and then Esoteric Agenda comes out of it. I had a bunch of people saying, like, wow, I've never seen a twist-ending conspiracy film where it starts off like scaring the crap out of me, and then all of a sudden there's this really hopeful ending. And a bunch of people were asking at this point, can you make an entire film that really focuses on what you were focusing on at the end of Esoteric Agenda? And that became Kymatica. So 6 months later, Kymatica came out, and it just did more than what Esoteric Agenda did. And that was the process of arriving at making films. I never thought I was going to be a filmmaker. When I was working on the first film, I actually thought it was going to be a 15-20 minute film showing a little bit of my philosophy, but a lot more about the band. And then it turned into a 2-hour documentary that had nothing to do with the band, and it was all my philosophy. So that was my process, and what was beautiful about it was, whereas most people, they wait until they think they're great, right? And then they post whatever they're doing. They research it a bunch, then they post it. Or they do a demo reel, and then they get better and better, and then they post it. Me, I decided I'm just going to do what I do, I'm going to say what I say, and I'll just let the chips fall where they may. And so when I put out Esoteric Agenda and Kymatica, I was asked to travel around the world and do speaking engagements, and everywhere I went, I met people that schooled me, basically. They had been researching far longer than me, and they were like, have you read this guy? Have you read that person? Here's a book, here's a documentary, I'm going to send you a bunch of stuff through email. And that started my whole filmmaking career, was deciding to make that one film. It just spiraled out from there.
But in terms of your awakening process, was it something that started long before? Was it like you were just very intuitive and you started questioning things, or did you have some experiences? I know you had some experiences with psychedelics since a very early age as well, right?
Yeah, and when I was 14, I started experimenting with mushrooms and LSD while all of my friends were doing opiates and really a lot harder drugs. And what I think that did for me, and I wasn't doing it spiritually back then, I wanted to try something that tripped me out. And what it did was it allowed me to realize that there are some things you can consume that expand your awareness, and some things that dull it down, and both of them have their place. But really, my awakening, maybe around 13, 14, when I started doing psychedelics, my brother also put the Tao Te Ching in my hand, and that really got me thinking of abstract concepts and how to hold paradoxes in the same reality. But I would say that my real awakening didn't happen until in my 20s. I'd always been an artist, and I always realized that art brings people together, especially music. It brings people together, and if it's done right, and if you're in the flow state, then everybody feels the same way. They don't have to say anything. They're not up in their heads. They're just feeling it, and they're moving to the music. And I always knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to reach people in very deep ways. But I wasn't a spiritual aspirant at that point. And then I had another plant medicine experience. I went down to the Amazon and I did ayahuasca, and it was the first time I did a psychedelic that was in a ritual context. And that just blew me away, because the difference between doing a psychedelic just on a Friday night, or whatever, and doing it in a ceremonial setting, it holds such a space that I was allowed to, and this was when I finally started experiencing what you would call a bad trip. And luckily, I had enough of people around me to show me that this isn't bad. When you're experiencing the darkness, this is good, because that darkness is always inside you. And so the deeper I went in, and the more they held the space, the shaman, because I went down to Peru, and it was with Howard Lawler, and he became a maestro, but it was also Don Robert, who's a Shipibo shaman in the Amazon. And when they asked me what my intention was before going into the ceremony, I said, I want to rip the ego away. I want to see all the darkness. I want to see it all at once. I want to go to the bottom, like rock bottom. I want to see it all, and I want to illuminate it all. And Don Robert, the shaman, he just chuckled, and then he looked over at Howard Lawler, and they both chuckled at each other, and they looked back, and they were like, "Are you sure?" And I had this bravado. I was in my early 20s. I was like, I could deal with whatever. You could throw anything at me. And man, I was a baby in fetal position, crying my eyes out that night and the next few ceremonies. But I got exactly what I asked for. And that was a big part of my awakening. But I would say probably the biggest part of my awakening was when I finally made Kymatica. And that reached a different crowd than Esoteric Agenda did. And the crowd that started connecting with me, it was just insane, because Russell Brand posted Kymatica and Esoteric Agenda was one of his top 15 favorite documentaries of all time. I had people from Maroon 5 connecting with me, people in all different arenas of life, people you'd never heard of, but they run Fortune 500 companies. And I was just like, what have I done? And I felt very small at that point. I felt really, really small, because I was like, these are incredibly powerful people and very famous people that are connecting with me. I felt kind of insignificant amongst them, until I actually voiced that to one of these individuals. And he told me, he was like, Ben, everybody thinks they're small until they're shown that they're not. And right now you're being shown that you're not. And everybody has that within them, but people don't wake up to it. You're waking up to it right now. So embrace it, and don't go into this false humility where it's like, oh, I can't be one of those, because that's you saying no to your mission. You can't go into false humility. You got to be humble with what you don't know, but when you know you're on the right track, you can't get scared and say I just don't want to be in the limelight. Because I used all that terminology. I was like, I don't know if that's for me and everything. And they said, Ben, you already started this train. You can't hop off now. And so I kept going. And that was probably the biggest transformation, was when I realized that what I am doing is no different than what anybody else in the world can do. You simply have to say yes and step into it.
Yeah, I think, for example, in my case, I've always had fears of public speaking. English is not even my first language. I'm dyslexic, so I had problems with reading and writing most of my life. And, I just forced myself to start putting myself out there more and more. And you learn on the way. You just kind of jump and learn to swim. And I think this is a very important lesson for many people, because no one has it all figured out straight away, right? You have to have this kind of approach. So I wanted to ask you more about some of the concepts you talked about over the years. One of the bigger ones is like this idea of collective consciousness, or universe as an organism. And this is something that I'm probably heard first time from the movie Kymatica. I'm not sure, but it was around that period, 10 years ago or more. And I literally spent like the last 10 years trying to understand it. And, I want to hear some of your ideas. Like, if you could maybe try to explain it in a nutshell.
Yeah, sure. Well, just so you and the audience knows, I've been spending the past 10 years trying to understand it as well. And what I think, it's blatantly obvious to me that if the environment around you is sick, then you become sick, we become sick, because the environment is a collective whole. Now we take a look at things like, well, this is my body, this is where I end, and this is where everything else starts. But we know there's scientific evidence showing from HeartMath Institute that your heart field extends beyond your body. There are theories that some thoughts may not even originate in the brain. It's actually you're receiving ideas at the same time that other people are receiving ideas. And there's even a term for this where several people invent the same thing at the same time, the same brand new invention, and it's called simultaneous invention, I think it's called, something as simple as that. And the more I started looking into those things, the more I found like Rupert Sheldrake, where he shows, okay, if you cut the tail or a leg off of a gecko, it'll grow back, and that's because it has a morphogenetic resonance. There's a field outside of it. And if if somebody loses their arm and they say there's phantom pain, I can feel my arm and it's in pain, but my arm is not there, but I'm feeling the pain. And there's all these clever ways of explaining that away, that it's just an illusion, it's all in your head. But the thing is that we don't even know what mind is. Science can't even explain consciousness. There's still conferences today all around the world with top scientists that are still arguing about what consciousness is, how it arises, how to explain it, how the physical mechanisms of the body interact with it. It's still not known. So the fact that the entire universe could be a living, thinking organism, completely aware of me, this little me, is not foreign. Actually, if you go back into time, there's a lot of Native American and indigenous beliefs of the very same thing, that as far out into the cosmos as you can see, you're still looking at you. You are one and the same with that phenomena. But not only are you looking at it like it's a bunch of lifeless, inert stuff, it's actually conscious and aware of you. But in the same way that we have powers within us that we haven't awoken yet. So I don't know if any of your listeners have heard of Wim Hof, the Iceman. Wim Hof is this Dutch guy, and he came up with this repurposed breathing technique, which is actually Tibetan Tumo exercise. And it's a way of unlocking our ability to use our mind to manipulate, I wouldn't even say manipulate, to influence the autonomic nervous system. So when you're born, you can't just say to your nervous system, I'm cold, heat up. You can't just say to your nervous system, I have low blood pressure, let's raise it back into a good balance. There's a lot of these things that are just automatic, but that doesn't mean we don't have the capacity to control them. It means that we weren't given the keys to the entire kingdom. We need to discover these keys. And sometimes it's with breath, sometimes it's with other things. So the whole idea that the cosmos is a living organism and that I am a part of it is actually a part of fractal science. And a fractal is basically where you can zoom in on an image, and no matter where on the image you zoom in, you're looking at a repeating pattern over and over and over again. And that in the tiniest little spot, you can see the entire universe. Well, that is what we are. And actually what the universe seems to be most akin to is actually a hologram. Now, this is physical material, this is true, but the boundaries of this physical world start to bend and shape, change shape when you do something like a psychedelic, when you go enter deep meditation. And some of the deepest levels of meditation, you'll hear Milarepa in his cave was able to, put his hands on the roof of the cave. And eventually, obviously there's no way you can press your hands into rock. It would either, if you're strong enough, it would just crumble. But there are many who go to that cave of Milarepa and say that because his mind allowed for the bending of what we would call very solid reality. And you go there and you see handprints in there. Could it have been chipped out? Could it have been, faked? Sure. But the concept that you're looking for about the conscious thinking living organism, the thing is we're not even sure who we are, let alone where we end. And therefore, the only thing we know is a fully encompassed consciousness within us. And we do know that you can engage with other people in ways that are other than words, other than, a cell phone. And we know this through Rupert Sheldrake's work of being able to communicate with people and with animals about our intentions when we're not even aware of it. Like dogs knowing when we're about to come home, just when we decide it's time to come home, and they run up to the door and there's a camera on the dog inside the house and the person who's 12 blocks away or at the other end of the city, and it's time to come home, and then all of a sudden the dog knows. This is quantum entanglement, and science is actually showing that this is the fabric of our reality. If you take this human-sized hand and you amplify it 1 trillion times, you get down to the quantum phenomena. But quantum phenomena, they don't work in space and time the way we think it does. So in a sense, this is a grand hologram, and the boundaries of it are only as flexible as our belief systems. And I'll just give one more example. The 4-minute mile, doctors, scientists said it's impossible until the first person did it. And then as soon as the first person, Roger Bannister, did it, then the person who was closest before that, a couple weeks later, did it. And then a year later, 300 people had done it. Now teenagers are doing it. So once we break past a barrier, it becomes easier for other people to realize we have a lot more power than we're stepping into. And yeah, I mean, like Kymatica right here, this movie also helped me understand that this universe really is a living, breathing, thinking organism, and it's not separate from me at all.
Yeah, so, I like to think about this concept, like you said, the reality is fractal. So you can see reflections of these patterns on different levels. So for example, if you think about you're having a dream, and in a way you feel like, you are maybe yourself in a dream, but the whole reality is created in your mind, right? All the people you meet, you can fly, you can do whatever you want. So in a way, you create your own reality on a small scale. It's like the same what we see here, it's on the bigger scale, where you have collective mind creating collective reality. And, even if you think about it, you have dualism in everything, right? So there's polarity, male and female, up and down, cold and hot. And the only way to have an experience, you need to have opposite polarity, because you don't know what it's hot without understanding what is cold, right? So if you want to have some kind of experience and see what you're capable of creating, you have to create dualism. You have to have polarities so you can experience things. And, so I think like all these ideas fit together pretty well. And even, we might think that the reality is physical, but when you look on the atomic scale, you see there's just vibration. And it might appear physical because we are made of the same stuff. So, when you play a video game, which is again a fractal reflection of reality that we created, a system that we created like computers and all this stuff, if you would be hooked to a computer, you could think that, this is reality. I'm moving forward, up, it's all physical and all this stuff, but it only exists because of computer, right? You can only have it on the computer screen. So it's the same thing here, it only exists because of consciousness, it's like it's linked to consciousness, and it's the same like your dream, right? It's a creation of consciousness. And I've heard a lot of people who had, psychedelic experiences, including myself, that especially I think on DMT or ayahuasca, where they suddenly would lose that sense of self and become the part of the whole universe, or they could look into any aspect of the universe. So I think what it does is that it gives us it removes the filter of avatar or body, and you can suddenly for a moment merge with the rest of yourself, right? Like, this is the kind of way I'm looking at it. And all these ideas like Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field, they can nicely be explained if you understand that it's all kind of a collective mind. And it's just like everything is part of one thing. It's just having a different point of perception, right?
Yeah. I think the beautiful part of that is, there's two things that come to mind. And one of them is how, as we're sitting here, and whatever the listeners are doing right now, find the spot in your body that you haven't been paying attention to. Like, let's say if you're sitting, maybe you're not feeling how the clothes are sitting on your skin. But as soon as I say that, now you're feeling the clothes on your skin. If I say, now bring attention to the fact that your butt is sitting on a chair, then you can be attentive and aware of that. But in a longer timeline, you can go through your entire life with your consciousness condensed into your own body and never feel anything outside of it, because we never thought to actually try it and practice it. And so a lot of the practices of meditation is to come into such a center and such stillness. And that's what a lot of yoga was the moving the body and getting it into a state and getting into a form of health to where you can sit still for extended periods of time. Because then when you come into stillness, you actually do feel all your boundaries dissolving. And you can't tell where you stop and it begins, right? The outside world. And then you can bring your awareness farther out. And then you start becoming, well, now I'm just hearing stuff. Well, yeah, that's connecting with you through waves as well. And you close your eyes and you can hear more. And then you can also sense subtle things, like somebody walks into the room extremely quietly, but they open the door and the wind shifts just slightly inside the room. This is how we're connected to the room, and we don't even realize it. We're connected to the barometric pressure and all that stuff. We're connected to the temperature. But if we were to be focused on all of it all the time, it would be pandemonium. So we try and focus and we tune things out that are monotonous, that we don't think are teaching us anything, and we focus on the things that we want. Psychedelics, if you take a psychedelic, it's hard to bring your focus back, because it starts to blur the lines between who you are and the outside world. Your thoughts become real instantly. If you have a fearful thought on a psychedelic, it can amplify itself very rapidly. And so the interesting thing about that is a lot of the times, if we don't want to hear something, we don't even realize what it is about a topic or an idea that we push back against. But our subconscious and our ego knows. Our ego senses when something is threatening it. And what we will do is we'll justify it in a way. Like, I don't want to hear about that because I don't have the time. When in truth, it's not that we don't have the time. And it's not that we don't even understand what they're saying. It's that we don't want to go there with our mind, because we're afraid if we open up that box, we're going to start realizing it's more truthful than we've thought before. So psychedelics, what they seem to do is they cut off the filters. A lot of what we have, like the doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley was talking about, is we filter out a lot of reality so we can just stay focused on certain things. And that's perfect. And actually, for the most of our time, that's a very useful tool. And so psychedelics aren't an everyday type of thing. Psychedelics are typically when we are sick it means we are toxic with our own patterns. So we have daily habits, and it builds up inside of us in the way we talk, in the way we feel, in the way our organs function, in the way our cells communicate, in the way that energy is allowed to move through our body. And psychedelics blurs that line. And that's why a lot of people, when they do ayahuasca, not only are they purging, but they're constantly moving around in their body. They don't know how to get comfortable. They want to sit up. They want to lean. They don't know what to do with themselves. And that's because this is when the energy that we store and we hold somewhere, we know how to tune it out. Even if it's painful, we know how to tune it out. But when it's on the move and it's swirling around us, we don't know how to tune it out because it's always something new and it's flashy and it's right in our face. It's right in our awareness. So what I would say about psychedelics and how this also shows that the whole universe is listening to us is that when you bring it back to breath, no matter what, like, my wife was just talking about how we had our kids and she didn't have a single pain med, nothing in her system. She just had me lightly touching her back to release oxytocin. And every time it would start to get to panic mode, she would just return right back to the breath. That was like the anchor. And I realized, well, that's the same exact thing as you do on psychedelics. When you're panicking, people will be like, breathe, just breathe. When you're panicking because you got bad news, people are like, breathe, breathe. So it always comes back with the breath. And what is the breath? But an eternal sharing of the inner world and the outer world, sharing with everybody and everything. And so in that way, I think that, psychedelics need to be used intelligently, sparingly, but very effectively. And I know there's a lot of people doing microdoses, and they're like, oh, I'm done doing big heroic doses. I'm just going to do microdosing. That's perfect for what microdosing is perfect for. But a lot of the times, microdoses won't go in and shatter some of your deepest beliefs. They'll just modulate some of the neurochemicals inside you. And so there's a time and a place for all of these things, for challenging some of our most sacred cows, some of our deepest held beliefs. And I think that's why I made Kymatica to begin with, was to really shake people up, not to jab and say, you're the sheeple, you're not paying enough attention, because we don't want to be jabbed at. That's when we put up our defenses. I wanted to say it with a tone of voice that allowed for people to realize, like, okay, yeah, there is a lot of darkness in this world, but none of it is bigger than me because there's no such thing outside of me. I am this universe. I am the entirety of what I'm experiencing. So the solution is within me, and the solution is always bigger than the problem, and we have access to both. So where are you focusing your mind? On the solution or the problem? And that's why at the end of it, all of my films, I always have solutions or things that we can do ourselves to build up the solution thought process within us.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a bunch of things here. Like, we're talking about, for example, leaders also being a reflection of collective behavior, right? So you see someone like Trump, but if you think about it, he's this kind of embodiment of ego, and it's basically a reflection of collective behavior in a way. The system that created him is based on people who are feeding into the system or who are supporting the system as well, right? And in terms of psychedelics, obviously there's a lot of fear mongering and war on drugs, and I think in your series Psychedelica, you delved into it a little bit, like when they banned psychedelics and LSD in the 60s, I believe. It was mainly because of all the hippies were against the wars, and governments started creating propaganda videos and fighting because it wasn't aligned with their message, right? Like hippies wanted to have, like, we're all one type of message, and then you have governments that want to get people to fight a war in Vietnam, for example. So that didn't seem to connect, and that, I think, created this war on drugs. But if you look at psychedelics, I think it's the same as you take anything that is really powerful. So if you want to drive a car, first you need to know some basics or learn how to drive a car, because otherwise you're going to crash the car. Or you can use fire to, cook your meal, or maybe burn the house. So that's why, rituals, certain settings, intentions, all these things are really important, because there's a massive difference if you just take some random dose from a random guy and go to a party versus, having experienced shamans and, intention and everything, preparation and diet and all these kind of things. The experience is completely different. And, this is something I think a lot of people don't understand, or, when they don't know anything about psychedelics. But, one thing that I find really interesting, and I think I sent you this video. I'm not sure if you checked that video. It's Aubrey Marcus, the guy who has this company On It. He was talking on Joe Rogan how he had this ayahuasca experience. So basically 2 months before his experience in the jungle, he had a dream of some kind of demon, whatever, attacking him or saying something to him. And this demon gave him a date. And when he woke up, he checks his calendar, and it's actually 2 months later when he's in the jungle drinking ayahuasca. And during his ayahuasca ceremony, he actually saw the same demon that he saw in the dream 2 months before, right? So how is that possible? Like, a lot of people think that, these visions are just projections of our own mind. Here you have an entity, and a lot of people see similar entities, like demons, for example, are very common. So you have an entity that actually appeared outside of the ceremony a few months before in a dream. What's your idea? What's your views about it? Do you think these are real entities? Are we tuning into different dimensions, or do you think this is all just projection of the mind?
Well, it's definitely, we're always projecting with our mind. So there's definitely part of that, but I can say that myself and everyone I've talked to personally that has done an ayahuasca ceremony, obviously they knew ahead of time they were going to do it. And as soon as they said yes, or committed inside them, yes, I'm going to drink this medicine, they instantly started getting some kind of signs and signals. I did too. And actually, as soon as I said yes, I went to the same exact people that Aubrey Marcus went to for the very first time. So back in 2000, it was the very beginning of 2008, I went down to Don Robert and Howard Lawler's spot down outside of Iquitos. That was the same spot that Aubrey Marcus had went to. And the interesting thing is yes, as soon as I said yes, I started tasting and smelling this thing. I had no idea what it was, and I also didn't think anything of it until I got down to the Amazon and I started smelling. It wasn't just ayahuasca that I was smelling and tasting. It was the ayahuasca and Palo Santo, and I think it was cypress, might have been. But I was smelling what they were putting in the air. I was smelling a moment in time that hadn't happened yet. But when you think about it, this is how we are. We have external scientists saying, and we have this idea of reality, that it just moves in this linear line, because we found a word-based model to talk about reality, right? But the thing is once we got down to quantum physics, we're like, why doesn't anything down here obey the physics? Like, you take your hand, you amplify it 10 billion times, you're at the atomic structure. You amplify it 1 trillion times, you're down at the quantum level. But those two levels, they don't obey the same principles. How? Why? Well, the thing is because when you're looking at something and it's kind of like an optical illusion, and all you have to do is look at it this way, and you're like, oh, I get it, right? It makes totally different sense. Well, I think that a lot of people who have an experience before they have the experience, or they have a premonition, what they're doing is their consciousness is actually tapping into what time and events really are. Because inside consciousness, we know what path we're on, and we know to a high degree of accuracy what events have to unfold for us to continue on our soul path or our mission in this life. So it might boggle the mind when you're trying to put this paranormal experience of experiencing ayahuasca before you experience it just at the moment you say yes, because what happens when you make a decision is you're splitting off onto a new timeline. You could have said no, but you said yes. And as soon as you split off into that timeline, what becomes much more realistic? Well, the number one thing that's going to happen because you said yes is this. And so you're starting to actually project your mind to that reality and experience what it is. That's how it actually makes more sense, because time, space, it doesn't exist like we think it does, but in our smaller, more feeble human understanding, the only way we can understand it is by saying that that's out there. The smaller something is, the farther away it probably is. The louder something is, the closer it probably is. And if it's not right now, then it's either in the past or the future. And if I don't know what it is, then it's the future. And if I do know what it is, and I feel like I've already gone through it, it's the past. But really, when you get down to the basis of it, psychedelics are breaking us into quantum reality. It's actually bringing us to the quantum level. And Stewart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose actually have a theory on this called Orc-Or. And basically, what that basically means is the orchestration of consciousness is a moment where the wave collapses into a particle. Now, we don't even have to understand that, but understand that a wave is connected with everything. It's like a doily, and it never ends. It's connected with everything until you focus on it. And then it collapses into a particle, and it becomes part of our real reality. So we're looking at it, we believe it's real, it's a particle, we're focused on it, so we're like, it's following my intentions. And I don't realize that I have an intention, I just have expectations, and it's behaving the way that I think it should. That's this physical reality. And what Stewart Hameroff showed was we have these little spindles inside of our neurons called microtubules. And when you take a psychedelic, all your microtubules will start arranging themselves and going through these patterns. And these patterns go into coherence patterns. And that just basically means there's an obvious pattern washing through them. And it's actually picking up on quantum phenomena. So it's resonating in tune with quantum phenomena. Not physics level, not human level, but Planck scale phenomena. And all that really means is that when you hear these stories of ancient shamans that could travel into a different dimension and see where the game would be so they could go and hunt, or see where their enemy is, right? A different tribe. All this sounds fantastic to us, and to our level of understanding, we're like, oh yeah, they're all into hocus pocus. That was back before when they were much more primitive, like a little child with a great imagination. And then you come to realize that children should be our teachers because they are in tune with these things. They haven't been culturally conditioned to believe in these very, very confined structures. So when you mention Donald Trump being an externalized representation of an aspect of us, that also means that the way that we should approach those things in the external world that we don't like or we don't appreciate or we feel are just the most arrogant expressions of ourselves, what do we do when we realize that we are being arrogant? We need to bring humility in. We need to humble ourselves. So the thing is when we are facing the outside world, on the quantum level, we are Trump. All of us are Trump. And he is the leader of the free world, supposedly. All of us has a bit of Trump inside of us, and Trump is our teacher. So when we get past the point where I don't like them, or I'm all about them, make America great, right? There's that duality. But once you get past that, you realize that what the representation is we always go through these expansions and contractions. Every time we've had too much of the Democrats, now we want a Republican. And every time we've had too much of the Republicans, now we need a Democrat. And it's the gas pedal and then the brake, the gas pedal and the brake. And that is our ascent and our ascension into higher, hopefully into higher consciousness. But the problem seems to be that we keep blaming the people and the events outside of us for what's happening inside of us, and we don't empower ourselves and try to actually bring the medicine. Now, bringing the medicine from within is, if Trump is super arrogant, hating him is going to make the problem worse. It's going to make him more arrogant, right? It's going to make him, you know what, I care less about what you say, and I'm going to bring the military in to our streets, the first time that's ever happened, right? Hating the problem is the exact opposite. That's feeding the problem. So the medicine for all of these things that we're talking about, all the problems on the outside and all of our inability to access the solutions we want, comes from our overly focusing that the problem is out there. It's not me. It's not my fault. It's him. It's them. They're much more powerful. They have more money. So they must be in control of the economic system. And I have no power. I'm insignificant. I'm 1 in 7 billion. And once we start tapping into more of what it is where our power really comes from, we begin to realize that it is a choice to dislike Trump. It's not ingrained in reality. It's a choice. We made that choice, and we sit in the disgust that we've created. Like Trump, I can't stand him. So we swim in that feeling, that state of being, which is primary. Our state of being is primary to all things. So when we are swimming in our dislike for something, then we are doing what all the great sages and what the Buddha said is the exact opposite of what the solution is. And the real solution is not, in a sense, just being okay with everything, but it's realizing that the medicine is focusing on what the external mechanism of the problem is with love. And we bring love into the darkest, most disgusting places we possibly can. And we don't avoid looking at the problem. And this is where conspiracy theory is this big word now. Everyone's like, oh, you don't believe in the official narrative of coronavirus? Conspiracy theory. You don't believe that what's happening with the protests in America is exactly what the media is telling you? Conspiracy theory. But all a conspiracy theory is a way to categorize something that people don't want you actually opening up and taking a look at. Because the more we take a look at it, the more we realize that we're all being played. And we're not just being played by the military. We're not just being played by Trump. They're being played by us. Walmart is at the whim of the people who come and pay for those products. If everyone realized, well, I don't want to support Walmart and their ecological impact, then you'd stop going and paying for stuff at Walmart. You'd stop feeding into it. And by doing that, you're actually taking back a bit of your sovereignty, and you're actually realizing that the only thing you can ever do in this life is choose. That's what you have absolute sovereignty over, is your choices and the state of being that your choices put you into. So that to me is what I put in all of my films, is we need to stop pointing the finger outside of ourselves. We need to look at those problems for sure, but we need to realize that the only reason why we feel disgusted by all the problems in the world is because we're choosing to feel the feelings of disgust. And it's hard to take a look at things like pedophilia and sex trafficking and very destructive practices around the world with love. It's paradoxical almost. We think, well, that's how the heck is that even possible? But it's also the highest spiritual teachings that you'll even find. If you go deepest into the deep mystery schools out there, you'll realize that love in the hardest, darkest, most deceptive places is the mission. It is the mission of bringing love and light into those places. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, first of all, if you think about it, a lot of things reflect collective behavior. So, for example, most people have some kind of mask, right? Like we often say one thing and think something else, and the same is reflected towards us in the media or in the way the products are created. Like, you go to a supermarket, you have like beautiful products that taste great but are unhealthy and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of the same reflection, we try to manipulate something so you can buy, and most people do the same thing on a day-to-day basis. So these layers are just reflections of collective behavior. And as you said, you cannot really fight fire with fire. This is something that I see a lot of people in the whole movement, truth movement, alternative media, all these things. Like, they only focus on problems, right? Constantly anger towards the situation or the person or the company, all these kind of things. I think it's important to understand the problem, but then you have to do something with it, because by just highlighting problems, you just make more people fearing of the world and everything, because they are just constantly hearing some bad news here and there, and that doesn't even make a lot of difference. So I think this is like the first stage. You need to understand the problem. It's important to highlight the problem, but then you need to focus on what can be done about it. And you cannot really fight it with fire. You cannot fight fire, with more hate, more anger. You gotta start working on solutions. And obviously the first step is yourself, right? Because your external environment is a reflection of your internal state. So once you change yourself, people start noticing, and they start doing the same things maybe, or asking what's going on. And even a lot of people might complain, for example, about Amazon, and that, I don't know, Jeff Bezos, he's not paying taxes, and he's, all these people who work there are exploited. But if you look at how many people, for example, have Prime in the US, which is, the delivery system, it's more than 50%. So it's kind of like, you want convenience, you want more stuff, you want cheaper prices, and these companies just adapt and create that reality for you, but they cannot exist without you. So you cannot complain about what's going on at the top, because it's all linked to what's going on with every single one of us. We kind of support the system, and it's dependent on us.
Yeah.
Right?
And the problems aren't even local, to be perfectly honest. So when I mentioned Walmart, the problem is not Walmart. If you think about it, here is what I mean, how everything is connected. You go into Walmart and you pay for a product. You're not just supporting Walmart, you're supporting the product. And the product is connected to a company. And so you're feeding a little bit into that company. Whether you know what that company does, what their mission statement is, whether they're polluting the planet or planting trees and helping the planet. And so it's all connected, but once you support them, that money goes into their pockets. Then they use it in a certain way, and yes, there's ecological impact, but then they pay their employees, and their employees go out and they use that, a fraction of that same money, and they put it towards something else. So really, the only thing we have control over are our decisions. And when you look at it that way, Amazon, we, for the most part, this is, when I see a lot of people and they have problem with rich people and they have problem with like the super elite, I used to have problems with them too. And it's not, I'm not like abdicating for them. I'm not saying that they're incredible people or terrible people. What I am saying is that we have these ideas a lot of the times, these entitlement ideas. We feel like we're entitled to things. Like, we have these rights, these inalienable rights, and we're entitled to it. So why isn't anybody fighting for my rights, right? Why aren't the cops out there fighting for my rights? But the thing is we think these things are just meant to be given to us, right? So the roads, we shouldn't have to pay taxes. My taxes pay for the roads. They should look pristine, and I should be able to drive on them, and I shouldn't have to pay for a single thing. That's fine and that's just one example, but who built those roads? Not you. You get the luxury of driving on those roads, but you didn't put a single bit of your energy, but your tax money did, right? And that's compulsory, and people have a problem with that. But so when we start looking at these things that we feel like we're entitled to, we still use it. Most people still use Amazon. Like you were saying, Amazon Prime is more than half what, the US population have Prime. So, when you look at that, we love using the benefits of what we get from it, but we're still happy to use the benefits from it and complain about all the dark sides that we see about these companies. But we still use the platforms. Some people, they don't, and they remove themselves from it. But then there's also like a paradoxical side to that. Amazon actually does provide a service that a lot of people are really blown away by. And eventually, where they're headed? They're headed into predictive shipping or predictive shopping, meaning eventually they're going to be shipping stuff to your house because they know that you buy these same products every couple weeks and you haven't bought it in a couple weeks. So you probably need it. So they'll ship it to your house. If you don't want it, you can send it back. But if less than 5% of those products come back, they still make a profit. So the interesting thing about that is these companies are now congealing and they're solving a lot of our convenience-driven problems. Like, I don't want to have to think about it. I just want the ketchup to show up in my refrigerator. I don't want to have to go to the store to get it anymore. I don't want to have to type stuff out on a keyboard. I just want to be able to say it and it to turn into what it is, and then a voice command, send that off to Mike, right? These are the types of things that a lot of work has come to this point where all of our conveniences or all of our struggles can be overly convenienced by this technology. And we're happy about that, but for the most part, a lot of people, they still complain. And they complain about how it's not perfect, how it's irradiating us, how it's destroying the ecology, how they're pedophiles at the top, right? And we keep coming up with all these things that we dislike about the way that it is. And we haven't been alive long enough to realize that these things have been existent since the dawn of at least our understanding of time, right? Sex trafficking, violence, war, rape, all the most disgusting things, that's been there as long as we can remember, and it's still here now. We just have new faces and people to point at. And so this doesn't mean, because I also believe that there are bloodlines and families that are in power, that have been in power for a very long time. And I do believe that there's a top-down control mechanism that is a parasite. It is absolutely 100% parasitic force on this planet. But the same thing that we do with all parasites, first you have to acknowledge what they are. Second, what do? You either take a medicine or you stop feeding it. You stop giving the parasite what they want, and you start giving it what they can't live with, right? So that's the mentality that I try and foster, is it still comes down to your specific choice. And then the reason why I made all of my films, especially Esoteric Agenda 2, which I just released not too long ago, May 15th, I released that film. At the end of it, what I say is, like, if we're afraid of 5G and if we're afraid of all these things, what we need to do is utilize all this technology, all the infrastructure that we've been given to create art to inspire people, not to scare them, because when we scare people, we build up their walls against reality. We need to make art that inspires people to realize that it's our choices, our decisions, and community that actually solves these problems. So that's why I say there's a higher level solution than complaining. Complaining just makes people aware of the problem. That's not bad, because I talk about the problems in Esoteric Agenda 2, but I end it holistically. I start it with the problems and then I show the solution at the end. That's holistic. If we don't have that ending, if we're not inspiring people, then all we're doing is proving to people, yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad out there. So we want it to be holistic. And my idea of the best solution we can bring into this world is to create art, because art seems to inspire people. And when you're inspired, you're not inspired to enact violence. Usually that's when you say I'm driven or I'm enraged, right? When you're truly inspired, you're not even trying to be like the person who inspired you. That might be part of it, but you're inspired to be more authentically you. And so there's something about art that inspires us. It engenders conversation around what can we do, and it also brings people together. All of the arts, it's as old can be. You set up a fire, people want to dance around it. They want to drum around it. They want to sing around it. They want to stomp on the earth. They want to be together with people. These are all the solutions that we should be bringing back now. Togetherness, higher level thinking, celebrating the fact that we are still here, we're still alive, we still have the ability, as long as martial law doesn't really keep us from gathering in large groups. Oops, 2020, right? Social distance. This just simply means that the problem is getting closer and closer and closer. But there's a paradoxical beauty to the problem getting supposedly bigger and bigger and bigger. It's also getting a lot more clear, which means the solution is becoming a lot more abundant. It's becoming a lot more clear, the solutions are. And what the solutions are, and have always been, is we need to get people back into a state of inspiration and realizing that choices, every little choice, but also the big choices that we make, are exactly how we feed the parasite or how we feed the planet. So I can't give specific solutions for people other than we should start growing our own food again and eating the food that we grow. We should start walking barefoot on the ground. We should start gathering in groups and celebrating with music and dance and the elements. These things may not seem like, well, no, shouldn't we go out and destroy a 5G tower? Shouldn't we go out and protest? Has it been working? Have those things actually worked, or have they made the problem worse? So that's what I think the real solutions are, is we need to get back into coming together as a people and realizing that our relationships are what's most powerful. Because what did evolution do? We're not a million, or trillions or quadrillions of little microorganisms. We assembled ourselves into this 50 to 100 trillion organisms that makes up me. But we also acknowledge that I'm not the one purely thinking. My gut and the microbiome, all the bacteria that doesn't have my DNA that lives inside me, also makes decisions for me. My connective tissue makes decisions. My brain makes decisions. My heart makes decisions. So at the end of the day, there is no disconnection between me and everybody else, and we need to start getting back into groups. We need to start celebrating art, and that's where the bigger, higher level ideas come from, because I can make ideas that my microbes can't, right? But I need them. So the thing is we really need things that bring us together, not the things that divide us. And right now, you can see in the US, do we look united or do we look divided?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you said about we are not just ourselves. We are dependent on this whole community of organisms, and they sometimes even influence us. If they're hungry, we might start craving something. But if you think about it, there's this theory called Gaia hypothesis, which is basically says that all the systems on Earth are designed to preserve life. So, in a way, we could think about Earth as a living organism. And, if it's a one system where everything is linked, what happens if we start messing around? Think about what would happen if you would cut a piece of vein in your body. It doesn't affect only that part of your body, but it affects the whole system, right? So it's the same, we start cutting trees, we start messing things around, and the whole system is shifting, and it creates all the side effects visible all around. And with what you said about corporations, obviously the problem is not as simple. We cannot really, a lot of people don't have a lot of choices. Maybe someone doesn't make a lot of money, and often the products that are more sustainable are a lot more expensive as well. So it's not as simple that I can just make a different decision. Sometimes there are a lot of other complexities. But we can all make small choices here and there, whether it's just making different decisions or making our voices heard through using social media. And another thing is, like a lot of people get angry when they see maybe environmental destruction or animal abuse, but some of them decide to do something about it as well. So it's not only that it makes people feel bad if you don't show solutions. Some of them think for themselves and decide, okay, I want to do something about it. I don't want to be maybe eating meat or something like that. They make their own choices as well. I just finally wanted to ask you about what's your view on this whole thing of global awakening. I mean, we've seen a lot of interesting things over the last 10 years. Some people believe that Mayans talk about great shift, and all the other cultures like Hopi, for example, in Hopi culture you have this prophecy stone that shows two different timelines, and one is ending with some kind of disaster, the other you can see a person walking with a stick. So there are all these different cultures that seem to talk about this period we are in now. And even if you don't believe in any kind of prophecies or ideas, if you look at where we are heading just by observing reality, and if you research what's happening with technology, for example, how it grows exponentially, how futurists talk about by 2044 we might move into singularity, we might have to merge with machines, we might be able to upgrade ourselves, change our genes. So we're definitely up for a big shift, whichever way you look at it. And New Agers talk about moving into new era. Some people talk about the end of the world. Other people talk about merging with technology or editing our DNA. What's your view about this whole thing?
Yeah, I think the future is unwritten in an extent, or to an extent. But I also think that the closer we are to this event horizon, technologically as well, is again a very poetic representation of where we are at as a species. So you mentioned, not everybody has every choice available to them. Actually, no human has every choice available to them. Billionaires can't make decisions that homeless people can. They can't even bring their mind, fully into that reality. Me, I don't have the money to make decisions that very rich people have, so I do what I can do. So it's a part of self-discovery. I have to discover what my gifts are, and then I act upon it. And, so I would encourage anybody who's listening not to fall into the trap of, well, that's easy for him to say. He's a filmmaker. Of course he could do that. Well, the thing is I wasn't a filmmaker until I learned how to do it. I developed the skills, I developed the tools that I have, and now I'm using them in service. We all have that ability. What I see is happening with the planet, I think it's going to be sooner than 2044. I think this decade from 2020 to 2030 is going to be the largest psychological shift on the planet we've ever seen. And that's not to scare anybody, because change is always happening. And when change happens rapidly, if you're in the right mind frame and the right set and setting, it's like this, all of a sudden you're on ayahuasca and it's at its peak and it's showing you all this stuff and you're like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. That might be 2020 to 2030. Because where China's at with 5G, and 5G is the beginning of the AI revolution. It really is. We had the industrial revolution, then we had the tech revolution, now we're entering what's the AI revolution. And I think there's very little possibility of us slowing it, because the United States is racing to catch up with China. And so what I think is happening right now, and you mentioned the prophecies, I think this is well known. What we're going through is a major change. It's going to be seen in economic settings. It's going to be seen in spiritual settings. People's idea of what spirituality will allow in, like will technology be allowed into spirituality? Because there are monks actually that have created, I forget what the goddess's name is, but the goddess can appear in any form. This deity can appear in any form. So they made an AI robot like Sophia, right? And it talks and it only draws upon the teachings of that deity. So it's speaking to people, and people were like, I thought I was going to be freaked out, but it's actually interesting because I have an idol and it's just sitting there and I can meditate on it. But when this thing is talking to me, it's interesting because I can ask it something and then it pulls out a quote from this deity. And so a lot of people are like, does technology belong in our spiritual endeavors? And I think, how do you remove God from anything? Is God or love not intelligent enough to even enter into our technology? How is it that we, creation, can create something that is external to all of it? Yes, it looks very foreign to us, but I think technology is an extension of our creativity, and creativity is beautiful. However, look what's driving this expansion. So this is what I'm getting at with this great revealing of the apocalypse, the lifting of the veil. What's driving most technology is how to sell people, how to track and trace and surveil people. And for most people, it's how do I not have to do stuff, right? I don't want to have to do that. I want technology to do it for me. And so for the most part, what's driving this expansion of technology is I want to see how convenient my world can actually get. That's a huge driver of where we're going. So I think the only thing that's going to have to happen to that is that's not sustainable. At some point, we're going to wither away, like we see aliens with big heads and small bodies. We're already on our way because 90% of us are sitting more than any other posture in world history. We've never been like this before. So we're facing an existential crisis, but I'm not saying it's doomsday-ish. What I'm saying is there's a truth, and you can ignore the truth, and you might atrophy a little bit until the truth is inevitable. You can't not see it. And I think that's going to happen this year, or I'm sorry, not this year, this decade. Technology is going to get to a point where there's going to be so many layoffs that people are going to have to say, well, what is value? What do I do with my time? What have I done with my time? What have I done with my life to get to this point? Okay, I have a universal basic income, but what's my purpose? So I think the beauty that's right around the corner is we are going to have many more people than ever before liberated from all these menial tasks, asking questions like, who am I? What is my purpose? What is valuable in my life? Do I have a purpose at all? And when we start asking these questions that we haven't been asking, historically, we haven't been asking it because we're too busy toiling in the mud, trying to get the crops to grow and, all that kind of stuff. I think what's happening is we are finally getting to a point where it is inevitable. We're going to have to start asking these questions to pass through that barrier. So I think this is the great revealing. I think all the prophecies have a kernel of truth in there. I think people are going to start having to ask the questions, and when you ask the question, our higher intelligence will slowly start speaking in different languages, through sense, through events, through people, and we're going to have to start waking up to the fact that we are the ones who have created exactly what this mess is, and we're going to have to be the ones to create the solutions to come through it. I think that's what all of those prophecies, the Hopi prophecy, the Rainbow prophecy, the one that you were speaking about, Greg Braden talked about the 2 different timelines. I think we are on the timeline that doesn't end. I don't think it ends, obviously, but I think we are coming to a point where we can't ignore who we are and what we're made of and what our purpose is anymore. To break through that barrier, we're going to have to start asking these questions and stepping into our own human potential. That's what I believe is coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think with technology, what's interesting is that, one of the things which is important for us is convenience, as you said. And we might go so far in this direction that technology will run us because we want to be so convenient. I think using technology to help us, like you said, as extension of our senses or tools that we use to help us to do things, I think it's great. But, we might go a little bit too far, and then, it kind of takes us over. So like, for example, with, brain-computer interface devices like Neuralink, the company started by Elon Musk, the idea is that we might be able to have a microchip where we're going to have virtual reality kind of experience linked directly to our brain. So we might start enjoying having, living in these realities more than we actually have, we do in the regular, normal reality. And also, it's a perfect way to control people, because once you have a company that can access your thoughts and emotions and have data about everything you think and do, this can be misused as well. So by, the direction we take, which is more entertainment, more convenience, more fun, we actually create a system that can turn against us and bring our doom. So I think, we'll see how it's going to play out. I think we're going to finish. I'm really happy to have you on our show. We're going to share the links: Psychedelica, Limitless, Kymatica, Ungrip, and Esoteric Agenda. Ben created some amazing shows, and thanks for joining me, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, man. I appreciate it.